I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
Right-wing African-American political commentator Candace Owens, the same woman who apparently led Kanye West into the sunken place, has now kicked up some static on Capitol Hill. She recently appeared before a congressional committee hearing into hate crimes and spewed a whole lot of nonsense about American political history. Specifically, she claimed that the whole Southern strategy, whereby the Republican Party back in the 1960s went out of its way to try to pander and appeal to racist, segregationist sentiment among white Southern voters in order to build up support in the white South and pull the white South from the Democratic column into the Republican one, was somehow a myth.
What's being taught in the education system is that the Republican Party and the Democrat Party effectively switched. It never happened. I believe Congress, within Congress, one member officially switched his party. It might be two, or it was one member. It was not more than that, so it's a complete myth that's built on nothing to make people believe that the Republican Democrats switched, when in fact, Democrats today are the same party that they were throughout the civil rights era, and that was what I was referring to. And there is a PragerU video that further explicates it that I would advise that everybody watches. Thank you for your time.
Really, Candace? Seriously? Get out of here. Please, give me a break. Now, I won't bother to go into all the historical details debunking Candace Owens' foolishness. A number of other experts, historians, and political scientists have already done so all over the internet, but I want to look at a bigger picture issue that this Candace Owens controversy really brings us to and alludes to. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Blexit. That's right, the admittedly cleverly titled campaign to try to encourage African American voters to desert the Democratic Party and join the ranks of the Republicans. Here's why I'm convinced it's not gonna go a damn place. To find out why, we'll need to consult a book, a very eye-opening piece of work published a few years ago by a sociologist by the name of Corey Fields. The book is entitled Black Elephants in the Room: The Unexpected Politics of African American Republicans. In it, Corey Fields makes some very interesting findings. He spent about 10 odd years studying ordinary African American Republican activists at the grassroots level and tried to get inside their heads and get a sense of what really motivates them to be Republican in the first place. What you'll find might surprise you. He found that black Republicans can be grouped into two main categories: race-blind or color-blind Republicans on the one hand, and race-conscious Republicans on the other. Now, Mr. Fields writes, a common thread that links high-profile black Republicans like Mr. Carson, namely Dr. Ben Carson, who is now Donald Trump's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, is their commitment to colorblind politics. You can also see this with recently elected politicians like Representative Mia Love of Utah, who is no longer in Congress, of course, and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. They acknowledge that being black is part of their life experience, but reject the idea that racial identity should orient their political decision-making. They often decry efforts like affirmative action to address racial inequality explicitly, claiming that such policies undermine black success. Mr. Fields goes on to write, what I found was at odds with the message of most black Republicans in the public eye. These race-conscious Republicans saw themselves as closely linked to a broader black community, and most experienced this connection as empowering. They were committed to conservative politics as a tool for the uplift of the black community. While they supported most Republican policy positions, their motivations were grounded in their black identity. It's important to look at the stances that they take. If you look at some of the examples Fields lists in his book, you've got black Republicans' support for school voucher policies. They generally support those policies because they see them as ways to give black parents power over their children's education and to reduce the influence of white government bureaucrats in black communities. They also tend to support low tax policies, not because of any fundamental belief in free market orthodoxy on their part, but because they believe keeping taxes low leaves more money in black taxpayers' pockets so that they can use that money to support black-owned businesses and other black community institutions, thereby helping to improve black socioeconomic independence. After reading Mr. Fields' book, I discovered that, lo and behold, that viewpoint or something along those general lines is actually where a lot of ordinary grassroots black Republicans are at in their thinking. As he put it in his New York Times article summarizing the findings of the book, and I quote, "One activist described his support of Republican politics as a way to achieve black power through conservative principles." And lo and behold, it appears that that brand of black conservative may actually be in the majority among black Republicans in general. Who would have thought? As he writes in this Times article, the available data imply that among black Republicans, racial identification is strong. The 2012 American National Election Survey suggests that more than 50% of blacks who identify as Republican see their fate as tied up with that of other black Americans. That finding was based on a small sample size, but combined with the experiences of my interviewees, it seems to indicate that the colorblind message promoted by prominent black Republicans is more reflective of what the Republican leadership values than of what black people within the GOP actually feel. Unfortunately, the publicly prominent black Republicans out there, the Tim Scotts, the Mia Loves, the Ben Carsons and so forth, they tend to be the kind of black Republican that hews to the colorblind, anti-identity politics stance that is most popular, frankly, with the Republican leadership and white conservative Republican voters. That may be a decent formula for winning elections in the United States in general, but it's no way to appeal to the black electorate. Now let's look at the big picture, shall we, folks? This coming summer, in the summer of 2019, Black America will essentially turn 400 years old. That's right. The summer of 2019 will mark the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first shipment of enslaved Africans on the shores of Jamestown, Virginia. For the vast majority of that history, American society has gone out of its way to suppress, oppress, and repress its black population. That history of oppression had consequences. One of those consequences is that African Americans over time developed their own distinct cultural identity and a distinct set of instincts, including always being on the lookout for any sign of prejudice against them or anything that would harm the community's interests. So it's not realistic at all to expect the vast majority of African American voters to support a party that basically tells them not to attach any substantial importance to their ethnic and cultural identity, not to attach any importance to their community's particular interests. And guess what? It turns out that that colorblind Republican message doesn't even seem to be that popular among most grassroots black Republicans. It's just popular with the minority of black Republicans who are pushed into these publicly prominent positions, and of course, the white mainstream that ultimately dominates the Republican Party and American society at large. In conclusion, Mr. Fields summed up his findings thusly in that New York Times article. The message from the current crop of successful black Republicans is that conservative politics is at odds with black identity. The GOP presents a party where you have to choose, be black or be a Republican. Given that race is an omnipresent reality for a vast majority of African Americans, that is a lot to ask. So there's the lesson for you, Candace. You really want this Blexit thing to catch on? You're gonna have to change your tune radically. You and all other, not only black Republicans, but Republicans in general. You're gonna have to create some space within your party to allow black conservatives to seek their own community's particular interests and to connect their political positions with the goal of seeking those interests. Anything else will never be taken seriously by the vast majority of black voters. You'll get some black folks to support you, but at the end of the day, most black voters, most black Americans in general, attach importance to who they are, to the identity that they forged over 4 centuries of struggle. You can't take that away from them. So Candace, I strongly suggest you go searching for the woman in the mirror and ask her to make that change. Until and unless you're willing to make that change, you may as well stop trying to make Blexit happen. It's not going to happen.